Okay, good afternoon, good day, good evening for people who are visiting with us from all the four corners of the globe. Welcome. This is our last meeting of the 225, 226 year, and it's a very special day because we are commemorating the International Day of Families. And each year, the UN celebrates the International Day of Families on May 15th,
Yeah,
so we're just a
wow.
day early. And the UN has been doing this for over 30 years. And well, it should, because as per the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the family is the natural and fundamental group unit of society, as we always like to say. On the world stage, the family, through family businesses and family farming, provide most of the world's economic growth, and they should be complimented for that. At home, the family is the primary educator of children. It's where the children learn about relationships, responsibilities, and respect for others. So today we have two wonderful speakers to address some of the issues. And our first speaker is Suzanne Sepperson, who represents the organization Generations United, which is based in Washington, but she represents the organization at the United Nations. And Suzanne is also vice chairman of the NGO Committee on Intergenerational Solidarity at the UN. She has a long and distinguished career with various nonprofit organizations and also as a distinguished educator with a PhD from the City University of New York. Generations United is a nonprofit that works to improve the lives of children, youth, and older adults through intergenerational programs, policies, and strategies. So to hear some more about that, Suzanne, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that lovely introduction, and thank you for Lynn for inviting me to speak. So the focus is building strong families, building strong children, roots and wings. That's what I think we should be trying to teach our children and prepare our children for the future. Next slide, please. Can you get to the next slide, or do I have to do that? Can somebody move it to the next slide? I'm sorry. Do I have? Well, if there's somebody who can take care of the slides or move it, because it's not letting me move. Oh, here we go. All right. So, okay. Thank you. If somebody could just do that, and that would help a lot. Thank you. Okay. So the questions that I'm posing for us to answer in very, very briefly is, how do we define a successful family? What does a successful family look like? What does a successful family do? What are the costs to society of unsuccessful families, to the children, the family, etc. And what does society owe children? So next slide, please. There are only two lasting bequests that we can hope to give our children: roots and wings. And this is commonly attributed to the philosopher, the German philosopher Goethe, who lived in the 1700s. And it's also associated with the journalist Hannah Carter, who wrote a book, Where Main Street Meets the River. But he didn't claim that he said it. He quoted, quote, a very wise woman. So the roots part represents stability, values, and family history. The wings represent independence, confidence, the freedom to explore, and we have to find the balance. And as a parent and as a grandparent, which are my greatest joys, I might add, that's not so easy all the time, but that, I believe, should be our goal: roots and wings. So that's going to be the focus today. So we think we know what a family is, and I'll just interject that in the 1970s and 80s, the White House put on a conference on the family every couple of years, and one had to be canceled because they couldn't agree on a definition of the family, or they didn't like the political orientation of the family. Next slide, please. Okay, so the family is not just biological or a legal entity. It's a socially recognized group of individuals connected by blood, marriage, adoption, or simply strong emotional bonds. And it functions as an economic unit, a source of emotional support, and the primary vehicle for societal socialization. The family comes, the structure in many, many different forms. And today they're much more accepted than they used to be historically. So we have the nuclear mother, father, children, the extended, add in some grandparents, aunts, uncles, single parent families, same sex parents cohabiting, families where they're living together as a family without the a legal benefit of marriage, blended step families, and extended multi-generational households. So I will just say, how do I know what the family is? I know it when I see it. It comes in different shapes and sizes. Now, from a sociological point of view, the family has very specific functions, and I'm just going to focus today on one or two. It regulates sexual behavior. There's an incest taboo. One of the things that people are concerned about now, society, governments, is about replacement of members, because we used to be worried that there were going to be too many people on the planet, and now some countries worry that there aren't enough people in their country, because in terms of taking care of the elderly, Social Security, just in terms of vitality, that today there is a much lower rate of growth than there used to be. Socialization, which is norms and values, which I will focus on. And then, of course, there's care and protection, status, the social placement, which again, I won't go into. But the other piece is emotional support, affection, nurturance, and love. And everybody needs that. And the family is the original and primary source of that. So in family care and production, let's go to family society responsibilities, please. Next slide. What's wonderful about the family is that the productive members of the family take care of those who cannot take care of themselves. Either they're not old enough, or they have disabilities, or they're too old. So the family does take care of them. And when the family's unable to do that, then government or society takes over, when the ties with the family and community are frayed, when the relationships are less strong or they're impersonal. And I think this is really important. If you could go to the next slide, please. The degree of familial responsibility for other family members is influenced by one's culture, upbringing, and I underline shared values, because that's really my focus. Shared values is, no matter what your background, religious background or no background, is teaching the golden rules, which is essentially treat others as you would wish to be treated. It is foundational, nearly universal. It's a set of ethical principles across major world religions, focusing on empathy and reciprocity. It's regarded as a core universal ethical code that transcends specific doctrines. Now, parents, grandparents, teachers, clergy have an obligation to teach and model the golden rule. And I just might interject into that. My concern today is that I don't even know if people know, what children in particular know, what the golden rule is. I don't know that that's emphasized enough in school. I'm old, but it certainly was a big part of my elementary school education, and I went to public school. So I think it's important. Next slide, please. Okay, this is just a list of all of the different religions, and I'll name them, that basically say the same thing, the golden rule, but in their own language. And if you can read it, that's great. If not, I'll be happy to share it with you. But Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, Zoroastrianism, Native American Indigenous, they all have some version of the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or do not do unto others as you would not want them to do unto you. But that's what we need to teach. In order to make a better world, that's where we need to go. And the family is the first and original unit that provides that socialization and teaching those values. So now the question is, what can we do to increase the odds of success and avoid poverty? Next slide, please. And we have some studies, and they're government studies, they're university studies, but they all come down to the same conclusion. And of course, some people will want to make political hay out of this. This has nothing to do with politics. It just has to do, what does the data tell us? So we know that you will have a more successful future if you are able to graduate from high school, if you have a full-time job, if you marry before having children, and for some people, if they attend religious schools rooted in faith traditions that emphasize marriage, family life, and moral formation. Often create environments where the presence of fathers and the reinforcement of shared values are not incidental but central. And I want to stress this, and I'll say it over again. You don't have to have a religious background, although many people would find that very helpful, in order to be a moral, ethical person. But we find, at least in the we're going to say ethos, that in the religious schools they do emphasize that. So next slide, please. Thank you. So now what do successful and resilient families, and I say resilient because every family, every human being goes through various challenges, experiences them, and has ups and downs. Some are able to come back, some are able to learn from them, some aren't. So we know that successful and resilient families prioritize spending quality time together, express daily appreciation, share core values, and foster a deep sense of belonging. I think that is crucial because everybody needs to know that they belong somewhere. They're not like tumbleweed grass. And when children feel, oh gosh, excuse me, when children feel abandoned, they're ripe for trouble. Okay, two-parent family benefits. Generally, children from two-parent families have superior health. I can't talk. Okay, superior health, better behavior, they have higher educational attainment, lower risk of behavioral issues and school suspensions. They have a greater financial security, which allows for more resources for education, entertainment, health, etc. And there tends to be, when there's greater wealth, they tend to have fathers and mothers emotionally involved with their children. So the intact family comes with some built-in advantages. Not that other families can't overcome the other, but I'm just saying in terms of what makes it work best, that makes it work. Divorce. And it's huge. At one point, 1 out of every 2 families in the United States were divorced. But now, in 2023 is the data, only about 37% of Americans ages 25 to 49 lived with a spouse and children. And that's down from 67% in 1970. That's from Pew Research Center and the National Institutes of Health. So, whereas single families used to be unusual, they're not anymore. While many children adapt, divorce can reduce a child's long-term academic and social potential. And I, again, underline this. While two-parent married households generally provide a more stable environment for success, the quality of parenting, economic stability, and emotional support are the most critical factors. So it's not how much you have, but those intangibles really count. Now, what are the potential costs of a potential dysfunctional families to children, families, and societies? And these, frankly, are in alphabetical order because they're all of great concern. So dysfunctional families, you have abandonment, child and spouse abuse, child trafficking, homelessness, suicide, and violence. And we tend to repeat or accept as okay or as usual that which we grow up in. So in order to break that cycle, if families cannot function and they're dysfunctional for whatever reason, doesn't matter. We owe it to them as a society to step in and care for them. And I might add, that's where Generations United does a whole lot. So the family structure and race and inequality. Harvard University sociologists Hastings and Schneider show that focusing strictly on family structure as a remedy for racial inequality overlooks systemic issues. Economic instability, systemic labor market barriers, and intergenerational wealth gaps, rather than just family type alone, are critical contributors to long-term inequality. And that's really, quite serious. Particularly the intergenerational, because wealth is passed down from generation to generation, at least some, and the disparity between the upper and lower ability to pass on one's wealth is enormous. So I want to turn to the Generations United report, and this came out, I believe it was 2023. So 2.5 million children in the United States are being raised by a relative or close family friend and do not have a parent living in the household. For every 1 child being raised by kin in foster care, there are 19 children being raised by kin outside of foster care. Without grandparent and other caregivers, the foster care system would be totally overwhelmed and would cost taxpayers at least $10.5 billion annually in foster care payments alone. And one of the things that Generations United does is that it gives out awards for programs of distinctions. And I urge you to look at their website. It's excellent. And what we know that intergenerational programs do is it strengthens families by fostering intergenerational connections, that reduces loneliness, and that goes for the young and the old, improves social skills, and enhances the well-being for both children and older adults. And for the younger group in particular, it improves academic performance, it increases empathy, it reduces anxiety, and stronger community bonds are developed. And I'll just interject that when I was teaching at Dowling College before it closed, I used to place students out in various placements, and we did some intergenerational programs. And it really didn't matter what the child's background was. What mattered is they had an additional older adult that said to them, "You're special, and I can't wait to see you next week." And so they had an ongoing relationship, and it usually lasted on the academic calendar. And one of the things we had to deal with is when students graduate and move on, and so on and so forth. So that's another issue. But the programs were excellent, and we received a New York State. We were part of a consortium, but the consortium received a New York State Excellence Award and so on. So where are we going now with families? It used to be that young girls would say, oh, their parents told them, society told them, you have to grow up, get married, have children. Today, girls' desires to marry has dropped significantly from 83% in 93 to only 61% in 2023. Teen boys, they still want to get married. It's been more stable, with 74% still reporting that they want to marry. So it's kind of interesting that there's been a complete flip-flop. Cohabitation is now a standard testing ground, with nearly 80% of teens expecting to live with a partner before marriage. And in order for a society to survive, you need to reproduce. You know, older people die, younger people come up, and if there aren't enough younger people coming up, then there are going to be issues in terms of economics, in terms of socialization, all sorts of things. So the attitude towards children has changed enormously. From a religious point of view, all children were God's blessings. But as I said today, that's not a focus for, I would guess, most people, at least in the United States. And there are economic barriers to having children. Rising costs of living and housing have made many feel that childbearing is financially unattainable or irresponsible in the current economy. And in a 2025 poll, only 48% of 18 to 29-year-olds, that's less than half, said having children is a crucial life goal, ranking it lower than financial security and home ownership. And so if you're not having children and you can't afford a home, the financial security is fleeting, you know that we're in trouble. So what are these drivers of change in attitudes and family structure and function? One is there's an increasing emphasis on individual fulfillment, and it's defined by career success and close friendships rather than family status. There's also great fear of instability. Children today are growing up in families where their parents have divorced, and so they know what that's like. In some ways, it's not as unusual, and so they've become timid or disenchanted with traditional family structures. And finally, there's reduced social pressure to marry and to have children. And even parents, and I was really surprised to learn this, increasingly value their children's career success over family formation. Whereas at my age, I just remember very strongly, it doesn't matter what else you do, but you better get married and have children. So and it is a great joy, but the point is there should be room for individual choice. And when we have straitjacket societies, whatever the goals are, we have issues. So we want to create an environment where people can realize their own goals. And so from a personal perspective, I always said this, when your children are young and you're working full time, it's really hard. And it's wonderful to have a strong network or support system. And if you're fortunate enough to have grandparents who can step in and help you out, or other family, that's a blessing. Childcare is extremely expensive. And so not everyone either wants strangers to help out or wants to bring their children to daycare or whatever, but that becomes an issue when they're young. And this is my personal view. Many parents of young children, they don't want to drop out of the workforce, but they prefer to work part-time. Many older people, when they're looking forward to retirement, they don't want to go from a 50, 60-hour a week to nothing. They'd like to ease out into retirement. And so to me, job sharing, would be a perfect solution. And I've said this for years, and I have yet to figure out why this isn't a, frankly, national rallying cry, particularly as we're becoming automated and AI is there. Why not share the jobs that we have and make everybody's life easier and happier? Because that is an important goal as well. So last but not least, I'll just say, most recently it was Mother's Day, and Melania Trump, the First Lady, shared her views on family and parenting and career for a Mother's Day message in the Washington Post. And this is what she said, and this is where I say, as a social scientist, we have to look at the data objectively. From my point of view, she didn't say anything controversial. She said women can thrive in both motherhood and business, while noting that strong support systems are often essentially for balancing both. And that's a correct quote, a direct quote. She noted that mothers often serve as children's first teachers of empathy, aspiration, and discipline, and play a central role in shaping their children's values, character, and sense of responsibility. And that, again, is all true. I don't see what the controversy is about. I think that, frankly, if children were raised to have values and focus on character and responsibility, the world really would be a better place. And I know many of us really would like that to be the case. So I say to everyone who's listening, good luck in your choices. Thank God we have choices. And thank you for listening.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Suzanne. You gave us some good news and bad news. And I recall from intergenerational solidarity point of view, some of my cousins in Italy, when they retired, was the same time they became grandparents. And they became the caretakers instead of outsiders doing that. So that's a good expression of intergenerational solidarity. And I must say, I have looked at your website, Generations United, and it is very impressive. And I recommend all our listeners to do likewise. So thank you very much.
I want to add one point. As a grandmother now, I did not have the luxury of having any grandparents, and I'm an only child. So the fact that I had the privilege of taking care of 4 out of my 6 grandchildren when they were babies, it brought me great joy. And I know everybody has different likes and dislikes, but when you don't have something that you think other people have, it becomes sweeter.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Suzanne. And I forgot at the beginning to say that if anyone has any questions for our speakers, please put your questions in the chat box, and we will have a Q&A, as we usually do, after both speakers have presented. So now onward to our second speaker. Our second speaker, as you noted from the flyer that we had, sent out is Jackie Aldrett. Jackie Aldrett is the executive director of an organization called OVSI USA. It's the U.S. branch of a much larger organization, and OVSI stands for the Association of Volunteers in International Service. And Jackie is the also Deputy Secretary General, I think, for the United States for the organization. OVSI operates in 41 countries, and through their programs, they empower children, families, help relieve poverty and marginalization through various programs that cover education, early childhood, youth development, health, nutrition, and much, much more. Jackie has been with OVSI USA since 2004, and she is based in the Washington, D.C. area. So, Jackie, thanks for being with us, and over to you.
Great. Thank you, Vinny. And thank you, Suzanne, and everyone for joining us today for this conversation. I'm honored to be here. So you've already done a great job introducing AFSI for us, Vinny, so thanks for that. I think listening to Suzanne and kind of getting us grounded in the importance of the family for so many reasons, I'm going to shift and talk a little bit more about implementation experience because I'm not I'm not going to come at this from a kind of sociological point of view, but really from a practical point of view, and just share a little bit of our experience and why the family is very much at the center of what we do in pretty much all of our work on poverty reduction and creation of opportunities for the poor and vulnerable around the world. And I'm going to link family and kind of the centrality of education for us. Um, and what I'd like to share as well is just how, I mean, this opportunity, this gave me the opportunity to reflect on what we've learned over time and how research and evaluations of our projects over time have reinforced our conviction that supporting the family is the best way to support children. And if our goal is, making sure that all children around the world have the opportunity to thrive and to grow into their fullest potential, we really need to start with the family, and and the research has backed that up time and time again. So I wanted to start with our understanding of what is education. So Suzanne, I mean, defined for us well what the family is. I would actually like to start a little bit with a definition here of education, because we at FC, we take a wide view of education. So for us, education is not only academics, it's not only learning what we learn in school, but it's how we prepare our children and ourselves to be in the world. So this is our definition. So we believe that education should foster mature, self-aware individuals capable of acquiring knowledge, and acquiring and using that knowledge to navigate the challenges of life, right? So that we can all contribute to the good of society and thrive as adults. And so because this concept of education is broad, it's much more about it's about knowledge, but it's also about the capacity to live, to become an adult and to engage in the world. For the child, what we now understand very, very well is that this is a process of self-discovery. And that process of self-discovery means that you need to understand, first of all, who you are as a human being and as a child. And you have to understand your value. And to get to that point of understanding your value, we're really talking about love. We're talking about that experience of unconditional love, that they know that they belong. Um, every child deserves this, and should have the opportunity to become accompanied in a relationship that helps in this process of self-discovery. And it's when we have this occasion, I mean, this awareness of who we are, that we're able to engage with reality. That's when a child is really able to flourish in school. When they come into school with a solid relationships at home, bonds of affection, and that safe environment to go back to, so that they can take risks when they're at school, because they know that they're coming from a sense of safety. Um, right. So this concept of education already kind of hints at the fact that the family is essential and that the family has to be a partner in education. And we can't just think of, the early years at home and then the years in school as being separate, but there's a continuum here of as the child grows up, they're learning about themselves, they're learning about the world, and then they come home and they have to continue to kind of interact in the two environments. So with that kind of basis, what we've learned over time is that, yeah, if we care about children, we must care about also their families, and in particular their parents and the environment of their families. And it's besides just the conviction that this is important, we also see in practice that a family-centered approach to supporting children is also the best way to protect children and to have impact. So strong families and engaged parents are essential for education and growth of children, both from this perspective of protection, so do no harm, and also for sustained impact. And I think the examples that I'm going to share show that a little bit. So in our experience as FC, I think back to years ago, when we have a large child sponsorship program, which is a very traditional kind of way of supporting children, where a donor will be attached to a family and they'll send financial support. For many years at the beginning, we were paying school fees for the children, right? But then we started noticing that in some cases, the families would come to depend on those school fees. And it wasn't necessarily supporting the families in their educational task with their children. It was kind of becoming a substitute for that. So we looked at this very carefully and we decided to kind of modify the way that we do the child sponsorship and really put the parents a lot more in charge of how they're going to use the sponsorship fees, choosing which school to send the children to, and making sure that the parents were kind of right in the front and the decision-making, seat. And making sure that us as an organization, even if though we had the best intentions in mind, didn't interrupt that process and that relationship between the parent and the child. Another important experience for us was as the HIV crisis started to envelop much of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, where we were working. There was so much attention being put in the early days on children and on making sure they had, they had the clinical care that they need, and then there was, a big wave of orphanages popping up to serve these children, and so it was a really interesting time for us where we could see that in order to support children, you needed to first of all, get them back into family-based care and avoid the institutionalization as an easy approach to helping solve the orphan crisis. But that also building the capacity of parents is really the only way to take care of children long term. So we, in this HIV space, we were working with USAID funds, so the US government funds, and AFC's work on this really helped to shift even the donor preference from child-centered programs to family-centered programs. And those family-centered programs, we also understood needed to be not only, they needed to combine kind of parenting education and parenting skills as well as economic and financial skills. It needed to be the two things because that's kind of the whole environment the family environment that we needed to thrive. At the same time, during that period, there was also really interesting research, not research that we did, but research that others did that contributed to this evolution of these programs, which showed brain development of children in institutionalized care as suffering quite quickly. Even after only a few years of institutionalized care, brain development was impacted. And so anyway, the research was kind of proving what we already kind of knew to be true, that children need to be in family-based care, and that the families needed to be supported kind of in all of these different dimensions in order to really care for their children as best as possible. And then most recently, we kind of our most robust kind of model of family strengthening is something that we call the graduation approach. And this is a multi-sectored, very intensive intervention where the poorest families in a community are invited into a 2-year intervention where they receive coaching and they receive support to do savings and savings groups. Peer support comes in around the savings group. Nutrition education, and a lot of inputs into how they can be the best parents possible. And then within that package, we gradually introduce financial literacy and business development and give them a business grant. But really, one of the essential features of this project is the work with the spouses and bringing together the spouses to come up with a common vision, to really clarify and discuss and clarify amongst themselves, what is our vision as a family? What are the things that are most important to us? And so we actually provide physical tools for them to do this. Something we call a household development plan, where simply the parents, together with the older children and of course the spouse, would get together and say, these are the things that we want to work on over the next 6 months and over the next year. And the household development plan brings it all together and gives them a tool which helps with accountability. So they hold each other accountable to that. It's been a beautiful approach with a lot of great success. And here we've been able to do impact evaluations. So very sophisticated, rigorous evaluations that showed quite dramatic improvement on a number of different domains. And interestingly, even though the project doesn't pay for education, by using this family strengthening approach, education outcomes are dramatically better as a result. Nearly all children are going to school and staying in school. We have similar results for things like hygiene and water. So the approach shows that even, without directing families, here's your money for education and here's your money for water. If you get families to come together and say, what are the things that are important to us? And of course, you're giving them a little boost financially by helping them start a business. They know what they need, and they start taking care of things according to their priorities. And so the education and hygiene outcomes really surprised the donor because they weren't paying for those things. They just happened naturally because the families were more united and more empowered, you could say. We were able to do longitudinal studies that show over time that even 3 years after the project finishes, the results still held. So again, this kind of backs up this hypothesis, right? That to support children and improve their outcomes, we really need to take a family-centered approach. Now, AVSI works, I've kind of been giving you some examples of our direct programming that we do, but we also work through local partners. And I think this is also an important point to make, that community-driven solutions are generally the best way to support families, because communities, because these kinds of approaches need to be very specific to the context. And communities are there for the long run, whereas an NGO may come and go depending on donor funding and all of the other factors out there. So one of the community partners that we have is in Mexico. It's an organization called Crecemos. And Crecemos emerged from the desire of mothers, of families, but particularly of mothers, to help their children do well in school. And these mothers basically asked their parish priest, they said to them, we have all these children in school. We can tell that the quality of the schooling isn't that great. But we also see our children they're not thriving. They're not thriving, and they're under pressure by society to go into drugs or to prostitution or to all of these different things that are out there. And really what we desire as mothers is for our children to learn and to have a better life through education. So these early volunteers supported those mothers and then continued to walk with them and learn from them about about the stresses on them as mothers and on families, and on how best to support their children. So it's been 20 years of this journey together, and they've developed a really nice kind of holistic model that you can see is a collaboration between the community, school, and family. Yes, I could tell you a lot more about Crecemos, but they work very hard on not only serving the child and making sure the child has food to eat and educational enrichment programs to go to, but incorporating the parents into that journey. So, for example, they provide meals in the mornings, but then they require the mothers to volunteer at the center, so that they can really absorb the methodology and understand the nutritional education that they're providing to their children and experience that for themselves. One beautiful program that I love, that I think that Crecemos has developed, that I think is illustrative of this point is a reading program. So I think we can all appreciate, the importance of story time and reading aloud to our kids as important for foundational literacy. But the staff at Crecemos understood that reading aloud to your children was also really important for the bond between the mother and the child, and they emphasize a lot between the father and the child. You can just imagine that fatherhood in kind of the poor communities in Mexico is under strain, to say the least. There aren't very many fathers in these communities, but even the ones that are there, there's a lot of strain culturally and economically on the men. Um, and so this program is very, very simple. It brings community libraries into the rural areas, and then it teaches parents how to sit down and read to their children and helps them understand the benefits from that. And what's amazing is that many of these women are not very literate themselves. So I'll never forget a conversation with one of them who was telling me, I've never felt confident reading to my children. Not only have I never really had books available, but even when they were available, I never felt comfortable sitting down with my child and reading to them because I can't really read. I struggle. But the Crecemos methodology helped the mothers to not have that as the barrier, but to show them how, you can pick up a picture book and look at the pictures and tell stories based on the pictures. And then they showed them how they could make puppets and act out the stories with puppets and just do different things to interact with stories and increase their use of language with their children. And these things just have been transformative. They've been transformative for the children, but also for the mothers. This one mom that I was describing told me how her child was very quiet, very reserved, not interested in making any effort to read. And she felt incapable of helping her child until she started making these puppets and creating all of these stories with her daughter with the puppets. And all of a sudden, the daughter came alive, got into it. She felt the attention from her mother, I think, was part of it, but also, the use of language and imagination and all of this. And then the child went on to, really, really do well in her kindergarten and move on. So I could tell you lots of more stories, but I think I've hopefully made something of the point, which is that in our desire to, yes, combat poverty and kind of improve the chances of all children around the world in their lives, we really can't overlook the family. We need to be creative about how we engage the family. We have to pay a lot of attention to the parents and understand the stressors on them. And to the best we can, we need to invest in the community organizations like Crecemos that are there, that are committed, that share the same values, and make sure that they're there for the long term for these families and kids. So that's my contribution for today. Thanks so much, Vinny, and all.
Okay, thank you very much, Jackie. This was really a very good presentation, and it really shows how organizations can really make an impact and benefit both children and parents at the same time and strengthen the whole community. I'm especially impressed with what you presented about Crecemos, and how that involves both children and parents for the betterment of both. I'm going to take the moderator's privilege to ask the first question before we go to the chat room. And I know you're a registered NGO in the United States, and since you work overseas in various development projects, you were also receiving some funds from USAID, which has now been wiped off the map in Washington. How do you cope as an organization, as an NGO, with very important programs in a number of countries, and then all of a sudden a major funder all of a sudden withdraws. Are you able to substitute other funds, or do you really have to cut back that in programs that are very beneficial but nonetheless need funding?
Yeah, thanks, Vinny. Yeah, that's a great question, and yes, it's very true. As you know, last year we went through a kind of a tumultuous period with a lot of our projects being canceled. It was quite a surprise. Even the one that I was telling you, the graduation for family strengthening, was funded by USAID and had all these great results. So we were on the verge of expanding it and adapting it to new contexts when the government reversed course and pulled out the funding. So it was very much a disruption. We're trying to remain positive here. We as an organization we've been able to pivot pretty well, and luckily, because of the good results that we had and the evidence that we had, a number of other organizations and government donors stepped up. And so the ability to adapt has been a bit uneven. There are a few countries in which we're really struggling to keep our programs going and keep serving the communities. For example, Ecuador has become very difficult for us, and maybe also Kenya and Somalia are a couple of the places where it's been more difficult to continue at the same level that we were before. But we're trying again to be positive and recognize that you don't just lose the experience and the evidence that we've gained over these years, which has been significant, and we need to keep, you know, uh, if really what we've been doing has actually changed lives and made communities stronger. Also, and we see evidence of that it's not all wiped away just because the funding has been canceled. So we're doing our best to stay confident and strong and keep looking for the next opportunity to continue. Luckily, our support for our partners, like Crecemos, I was describing to you, has generally come from privately funded sources and foundations. So luckily, none of those partners have been directly affected, which made us very happy.
Okay, well, it's an additional struggle, an additional job that you have to cope with. Thanks very much, Jackie. Suzanne, I noticed that in the chat box, someone requested slides. Can you make your slides available?
I'm not sure what that means. So if you send, this is embarrassing, but if you send me an email, I will send that person whatever they want. And I have no problem doing it, because I don't, do they want all the slides, some of the slides? I'm not sure, how to even, is there an email or something? I'm not even sure how to,
Well,
how to, I mean, I know how to send attachments. I'll be happy to do that.
okay, if the answer is yes, here's the easy way of doing it.
Okay.
Send all the slides, if she doesn't already have them, to Lynn,
Oh,
and
Linda,
the person
I
who
already have
requested
them.
is,
Already have them.
oh,
They're
fine.
done.
Okay, so you
great.
can send them to Susan Roylance, and
Yes.
Susan Roylance, the other Susan, is a stalwart for the NGO Committee on the Family. I don't think she's ever missed a meeting, so she
Wow.
has a deep interest in families and what they do. So we'll take care of that for you.
Thank you, Lynn. Can I just add something? Because
Sure.
this is fascinating listening to Jackie. One of the
Yes, you can
activities,
ask a question to Jackie and vice versa. Why not?
one of the activities that the Committee on Intergenerational Solidarity has undertaken is a program in Ethiopia, and it's under my colleague Kevin Brabazon. He is a genius. He really created the program. It started very small. Last I heard, we had about 2,000 participants, and Ethiopia has its own civil war going on. But speaking to this idea of funding, when families, and honestly, when I first saw this on videos and so on, these families were living in extreme poverty, and older people were considered a drag on the family. They didn't need them. Well, what they did was they were able to give chickens and the chickens made eggs, and these old people went to market and sold the eggs, and they brought money back to the family, and all of a sudden these old people were, very valued people, and the standard of living they started, and it was with the local church there, and so on and so forth. It really became a thriving business, and they're moving on to much bigger and better. So it started very small, but it really changed the dynamic. So, and the reason I'm sharing this is because when there's a shortage of funds, particularly in rural areas that don't have access to, many programs and so on, something as simple as, I think they started with 10 chickens, made all the difference.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Ryan, I saw you put your a statement in the chat box that you were going to take care of some questions. So where are you, Ryan? Do you want to do that? If there's something I've missed?
I'm here. There aren't a lot of questions so far, so we'll ask the one that's in there and invite everybody else if you have questions to put them in the chat box. But the first question is from Marcia Barlow, who is our former chair of one of our co-chairs of the committee. But she says, a question for Jackie. What are your thoughts on the following debate? Increasing spending for improving education versus family structure and parental involvement having the greatest impact on educational success. So, like, the government taking over the education or increasing the family structure and letting that take care of the education. So what's the debate? As an example, there are states that have relatively low educational funding expenditures, yet have better educational outcomes for children because the parents are more involved. How do you strike the balance?
Yeah. Well, thanks for the question. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I really want to get into the debate kind of on the US side of things, but what we see in our experience is that yes, you can throw a lot of money at the problem of schools, but that's not necessarily going to solve the problem of learning and good educational outcomes. So no, we are much more of the belief that well, yes, you teachers need to be paid, and the there need to be books and desks. Like there are some minimum requirements for education to happen. Family engagement in education is really just as important as those material things. Because without the parental engagement and family support, you can have very fancy materials and school settings, but you may not get the outcomes. And those things can also be built in later. So just give one example, in Uganda, we have a community-based organization in the slums of Kampala, women with HIV. And they really insisted that their main priority was education for their kids, and they weren't satisfied with the education that the government was providing, in part because they were discriminated against because they were HIV. This whole community was really, really heavily affected by HIV. So they decided to start their own school, but the parents wanted it, and they were into it, and they were demanding, good education for their children. And the resources came later. The school building and books and stuff came later. But because the engagement with the parents and the community were so strong, I think that really was what has driven the success of this school. And so this school in the slums of Kampala is now one of the highest performing schools in the country. And so the resources came later, but even still, they're much under resourced compared to probably the fancy private schools. But it was the parental engagement, I think, that's really more important. So I'm not going to give you a formula of what the percentage should be or what, but just to say that investing in engagement with the families and that needs to be something that the leadership of the school believes in, and they communicate that down to the teachers. You just can't write it in a policy or just wish it into being. It needs to be a commitment from the leadership of the school and then all throughout at the level of the teachers.
Yeah, that it needs to be the partnership there. I think is really important. And not just in Uganda. It needs to be a partnership here in the United States and elsewhere as well. Thank you, Jackie. Lynn, who is also one of our former co-chairs, current co-chairs, has her hand raised as well.
Yes, excellent presentations. Susanna, you asked such an important question. What do we owe children? I don't think we ask that enough. And you give a lot of information about, married parents provide more stability. Certainly, fathers that are around, as Jackie also mentioned, is a real plus for children. The biological bond is important. So my question is, and my son and daughter-in-law, they do fostering for teenagers, and it's such a miserable mess. Prevention. How can we help young people form families that are stable, that don't fall apart, help them make better decisions, so that we don't throw our children into these very unstable situations? Jackie mentioned parent education, which I totally believe in. But even before that, and maybe Jackie has some ideas, how can we prevent unstable families?
That's a tough one. If I had the answer to that, if any of us, that would be great. But here's where I'm really coming from. And I say this in regards to many different areas. I think in the world, there is a lack of moral leadership. And that's why I talked about the golden rule. It doesn't matter where you're from, the ideas are pretty similar. And I think the media has to be involved, the politicians have to be involved, the athletes have to be involved. So TikTok has to be involved. They have to say and give examples, and they have to be very explicit, because I've learned that you need to hit people over the head and say to them, having a family is a responsibility, and you owe it to your children, and better yet, you owe it to the world to make the future a better place than when you found it. But it has to be explicit, it has to be taught. And my friends who know me, they laugh at me for this. Well, I said I went to public school, and it was in the 1950s in the Bronx. Okay, very working class community. And we're all immigrants, as myself included. And every day we read Benjamin Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac. And every day we had another proverb, and we began the day by learning about it. And this was all new to me. I'd never heard of these things, and so on. And I found them very interesting. And I still remember those classes like, oh, that's a good thing. And I've never heard it spoken about in that way. And it seems to me that today, what we have are teachers from K through university preaching their politics instead of preaching a moral code that doesn't have to have and probably shouldn't have a basis necessarily, unless you're going to a religious school, shouldn't have a basis particularly from religion, although it all comes down to the ancient religions and in my view the golden rule and so on. But what I'll call civic education and historical education, so that we learn, and we have to look at ourselves, and we're all human beings, our parents, our grandparents, ourselves, we're not perfect, but we have to have this idea that we could do better. And the things that children really need are love and time. You can't, push that away and let somebody else do it. So that one of the things, when I was at Dowling, that we did ESL classes in the local libraries, and the parents and grandparents all said, all immigrants from all over the world, they said, our children are learning English in the schools, but we can't speak English and we want to learn. So this was totally free. We organized it. The graduate students got, credit for it. The undergrads got all this volunteer point. They made connections. And it really made a difference. I mean, some of them contacted me years later, and it was like, wasn't that big a deal, but it was a big deal. So I think it has to be I'm going to say this, a revolution in moral thinking that has to be promulgated from every corner, including the clergy, wherever it comes from, the teachers all over. So that maybe I'm dreaming, but that's really the only thing that I can think of.
Yeah, I think Jackie should take this question too. And before you do that, I should mention that Jackie is a happily married mother of 6, I believe, or is it 7?
Oh, wow. Mazel tov.
So how would you answer
Thanks.
Lynn's question, Jackie?
Yeah, I think Yeah, I think we do actually spend a lot of time thinking about this because yes, we spend a lot of energy helping kids in orphanages get out and back into family care. But then, of course, the question is, but let's prevent this from happening to begin with. Um, I do think people need role models. And unfortunately, in a lot of these communities, they're lacking role models of people who've had strong marriages, who've stayed together, and who've sacrificed, as someone mentioned in there in the comment there, who've put in the sacrifice that means that it takes to raise kids. So they need role models, which is where the community-based groups, oftentimes the faith-based groups or the parish groups, are really so important. I think we need more peer groups, the mother groups, or these what do they call them? Self-help groups. These groups of women and families who come together supporting each other, I think are really important for prevention as well. But I'm going to share actually another example of something from Crecemos in Mexico which might surprise you in terms of a tool, an educational tool to inspire children to really desire a good life and desire better. So in Crecemos, they have this emphasis on beauty. And in the center, when the children come in the morning for breakfast, they put classical music on. And so that was the first introduction of the children to classical music. And this is a slum on a hillside in a very dangerous part of Mexico. So it was a bit jarring, right, or shocking for the families to come in and hear beautiful classical music. And then at a certain point, the director met someone who was a violin teacher, and he wanted to teach violin. So he started teaching violin and then guitar to the children at the center. And this was a huge turning point because in a place where people were mostly resigned to poverty and resigned to violent relationships, where people don't get married, they just have, relationships and kids here and there, and, that kind of messy situation because there was really not a clear way out of that. That was the dominant environment, right? This resignation to the ugliness around them. The introduction of classical music brought the children and the families out of that and helped them to start to imagine something better for themselves. And they claim, and we don't have hard and fast evidence for this because it's a little bit hard to prove it, but we believe that the introduction of classical music and musical training has helped the children to stay more committed to their schools, has helped the families to kind of invest more in their children because they could see the potential of their kids who play amazing music, even though they're coming from poor backgrounds. And it's taught us how, we might feel that these problems are so big, but maybe the solutions are there, and we just have to be creative and look for them. And we all need, beauty as a solution here. I think is a really beautiful and powerful message. Maybe not the one we were expecting, but it has a role to play.
So
Excellent.
we have another question in the chat that I actually was also curious about. Suzanne said that the desire to get married and have kids has kind of reversed, that men are more desirous of it now than women are, right? Not that we want that to exactly be reversed again, but I'm curious what the cause is, if you know, of that reversal and what could be done to increase the desire on both parties to uh, to get married and have families.
Thank you for that question because it reminds me when I was teaching introductory to sociology, I would always, when we got to the intro class, the chapter on family, I would always pose, anonymously for the men in the class to answer the question towards women because back then that's where it was, and for the women to answer the questions about men. And I would say to them, what qualities are you looking for in a mate? And invariably, the women all said a good earner, a professional. And the men all said a beautiful, attractive woman. And I should have kept this data, because over the years they started to switch. And then the men said, well, no, I want, a woman who will go out and earn money and help the family. And the women kept saying, well, I want men who will help me, in the household. And they all agreed you have to have a good sense of humor. And it does get you a long way. So the question is, why are we changing? Because reality is changing, circumstances are changing, and the rigid roles are breaking down for the better, Frank, in my opinion, so on. But as far as what changes this, it goes back to role models. And I was thinking, as Jackie spoke many, many years ago, more than 40 years ago, my family and I were in Mexico, and we went into the outskirts and so on. And there was literally a hut with one light bulb in the hut and a TV station. And my daughter, who was 5 or 6 at the time, looked at this, and we had just been to the Museum of Natural History in New York City, where they showed people in various environments. And she said, oh, Mom, look at this, just like we saw in the museum. But the one difference is they had that one light bulb and the TV station. And back then they were showing, very popular, and forgive me because I didn't watch it, but it was a ranch show with a really, really lavish Ewing, whatever the Ewing family was, very lavish lifestyle. And these little kids came and said, do I live on a ranch and do I have that lifestyle? And I said, no, most people don't. It's a TV show. So my question really was, it's wonderful. Arts always bring people together. It gives them hope. And I think that's what most people need. They need to see a way out. And there's no one path. We need role models in all the different paths. But my question is, weren't these poor children in Mexico exposed via the TV and I mean the cell phones and so on, or are they so cut off that they're not even aware of what's going on? I mean, because what I know is, no matter where you are, you kind of know what's going on in the world. So that really role models. That's it.
Jackie, do you want to comment on that?
I guess I was thinking to comment on, more on the original question, though I'm not like a sociologist here, but what I do notice in the developing world is that the many people, women are very much affected by the modern Western ideas of womanhood. And so there is a change in, I'm not saying it's all good or all bad, but there is a notable change in the young African women that I'm meeting, to career and to money as the measure of success. So anyway, I just bring that up as something that at least we are at least a little bit concerned about, because of course it's a good thing, and I'm not at all saying that it's not, but the idea, kind of anti-family ideas are out there, and I think the modern culture that shows kind of like, the independent woman, wealthy with no children is on the phones. It's on the phones. It's the celebrities. And so I do wonder what that is going to do to families, which are generally still strong, as a social unit in much of the developing world, that may be changing as well.
I think
Any more questions? We have just about 5 minutes left, Ryan.
I was going to say, I think we have time if you can answer this question quickly, and then I have a wrap-up question. So this is one last question from Marcia, who says, I wonder about the role of grandparents in increasing education success. Any thoughts on what that might look like from either one of you?
I would say fabulous. If you are lucky enough to have grandparents, and if you have access to grandparents, they can not only step in with childcare, but in terms of exposing them. And I feel very blessed. I have 3 children and 6 grandchildren, and I always say my job is to be their cheering section. I mean, their parents can do everything else, but I'm there to expose them and to tell them that they're loved. And that, to me, is the biggest thing that grandparents can do. Perhaps they can give them some extras if they're able to, but it's the relationship, to know that they matter, to know that they belong. And the other thing I wanted to say about the celebrities and so on, they go in and out of marriage and like nothing, but they don't what we don't hear about is how much money it costs to maintain that lifestyle. It's just a phony lifestyle, and that's where I'm back to role models, and the leaders in society across the spectrum ought to be talking about the glories, the joys of family. Because when all is said and done, you lose your job, and then what? You have no identity, but your family, you still count as a human being for who you are as opposed to what you do. And I think that's the message.
Yeah.
And I would only add that there are many, many grandparents out there who are doing the job of parents. There are a lot of grandparents who are filling in for parents for lots of different reasons. And so there already are very, very much, I mean, the roles meld a lot in the developing world contexts. So grandparents are already doing a lot. So absolutely, they are key to the love that the child can receive, which is so fundamental to their ability to learn and to grow and thrive. So amen to that.
Thanks. And then just as one last wrap-up question for me, we've talked a lot about the stressors on families, et cetera, but what is the one thing that gives you hope? What is the trend, the policy? What's the one thing that gives you hope going forward?
Jackie, do you want to start? I'll be happy to say. First of all, I am by nature an optimistic person, so that I always know, however bad it is, we can get through this, and it'll dip up and it's in waves. It'll get better. The other thing is that I started out with roots and wings, and there are people who are giving their children the roots, and the ties are not severed, and they have wings, and sometimes they'll fall down or go the wrong way, but if they have good roots and they know they can come home to parents, grandparents, extended family, whatever, they will pick themselves up and go on. Nobody has a straight path in this world, nobody. So the hope is that the values that they learned when they were children will guide them, and if they didn't learn them as children, it is never too late to learn. And maybe they come across a teacher, or maybe they fall in love with someone who gives them that hope that they didn't have before, didn't see. So I just remain optimistic that things are cyclical and things will get better.
Yeah, and I would add that I mean it fills me with hope that um, even if the biological family fails a child, which unfortunately in many cases it does, um, adoptive families fostering even these community relationships. People are choosing family relationships, how to put it, right? Even outside of their biological care. And that can really fill in gaps and heal and help people to continue. And so that to me is hopeful, because there are people who are willing to, who are looking out for the children, and people who've been, gone through a lot. And so the fact that people are resilient and can heal and grow, that to me is a sign of hope.
Okay. All righty. Thank you very much. I think I've just looked at my watch and it's almost 2:30. And as I said before, this is our last meeting of the season. And also, not only that, but we will be having elections shortly to renew our executive board. And this is my last meeting as co-chair of the NGO committee. So you will be getting some ballots. All of those who have paid dues and are duly accredited NGOs at the UN will be able to participate in the elections, and that will take place in June. And the NGO committee, well, first of all, let me thank both Suzanne and Jackie for putting us putting the family in a good light, in a hopeful light, as we conclude our season. And thank you both very, very much. You were both excellent, and appreciate your time and effort that you put into this. So since this is my last meeting, let me say to everyone, arrivederci. And we will be back in October as a family NGO committee with hopefully another new interesting program that you will all attend and bring a friend to. So for now, have a wonderful summer, and so long for now.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all of
Thank
you.
you, everybody.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Vinny, for all of your hard work.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate it. It's wonderful to be able to be part of this group.
Great to have you, Eve. Hi,
Okay.
Joseph.
Okay. Well, I'm going to run, but I thank you enormously for this opportunity, for the honor. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I hope we'll do things together in the future. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay. Take care.